Hello, historians. Welcome back. Hope you're staying inside, staying safe. A few little heads up. For this conversation, you're gonna want this presentation open as well because there's quite a few videos you want to play, so you can bounce back between our conversation here and the videos in the presentation itself. Second announcement, as we've been going back into period 8 and the history, we're starting back up the Inquisitive. So, chapter 25 Inquisitive will be due Monday, and then every Monday after that, we'll just be hitting another chapter. So, make sure you're doing that as well. Third announcement to try and get back into a little more of the structured nature of our curriculum. I put a little discussion board inside this folder as well, where you'll be able to do a little hip practice on a document. So you'll be able to do your context as well as your choice of purpose, point of view, or audience. I also attached the hip frame sheet we've used in the past to help you out. As always, please let me know what questions you got for me. But let's go into today's talk. It builds off yesterday, so let's first review that. Why did Americans endorse a new engagement in international affairs during the Cold War? Well, we mentioned how the nation of North Vietnam, a communist nation, remember, was accused of attacking the US in the Gulf of Tonkin in 1964. In retaliation, the US passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which Congress granted the president broad authority to conduct any military action the office felt appropriate. We had mentioned North Vietnam in terms of domino theory. If communism spreads from there, it will spread everywhere. Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, again, was built around, we'll talk about social attitudes today, but built around this incident off North Vietnam's coast, in which we said we were attacked, which then led the president to get the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which, as we saw, meant they get to decide how to handle this conflict. And as we'll find out with the Johnson years, that means troop escalation up is to over 500,000 soldiers by 68. So today, let's talk about kind of the social attitudes about the war. How did Americans feel about this escalation in Vietnam? Well, this becomes not the first time by any means. We even saw there's draft riots in the Civil War, but the draft becomes a huge fixture of American involvement in Vietnam. This is actually a shot of the televised draft. Yeah, much like you would kind of buy a lottery ticket and tune into TV and see the balls rolling in live to see if your ticket was right. What they would do is they actually televised the draft number selection. So going into the next year, each individual would have a number assigned to them. And then as the year went on, they would start to go up through the numbers to start to draft people. You would get a notice like this in the mail. This is from 1970. This is a John Doe one. And you would get a letter telling you you're inducted by the draft. Now, this by no means implies that each person who was selected or drafted is being sent to fight on the front lines of Vietnam. Not at all. Numerous exemptions occur for a variety of reasons. People don't get accepted, but it's still pretty alarming the scale of this draft that's starting to reach out and impact maybe not every American, but every American probably knows someone who's being directly affected. And this leads to a lot of change in this war. Over the course of Vietnam, 1.7 million people will be drafted, 17,000 of which will end up losing their lives. And notice this too, the voting age was 21, but those under 21, 18, 19, 20, were eligible for military service. Thus, you could kind of be forced into combat, but you weren't trusted with the power to vote, which many felt was unjust. Draft manipulation also started to turn people against this war as well. We talk about draft manipulation for a long time in the conflict. There's draft deferments. If you're in college, you're exempt from the draft, which meant mostly lower income groups were targeted more heavily by it. And as draftee numbers go up, it's also the volunteer forces that's being ravaged. 58,000 Americans will lose their lives. 61% 21 or younger. We're really talking about the youth of America bearing a brunt of this conflict, which whenever you see the youth being affected, we often see kind of a dynamic in kind of perception of a conflict. A great example of the growing unrest over the war is the Woodstock Music Festival. While not and focus solely on maybe counterculture or counter war, this is a great song of sarcasm. So do not take the song literally. And heads up, there is a little bit of language in there. But if you watch this in the presentation, you'll see it's a mass amount of people who are going along with the song, this sarcastic little jam about the rise of the Vietnam War, how people are being drafted, sent off to war, and also how people feel it's going to benefit corporation, the industrial complex of the nation. So you can also see some of the fashion of the day as you watch that video. So you go watch that and come back here. Welcome back. Maybe a more formalized movement that grew against the war would be SDC, or Students for a Democratic Society. This is rather interesting because it's a college university led protest movement, which turns a new page for American society. This kind of counterculture being driven through higher education. You can see um, the the posters detailing a lot of their feelings. Get out of Vietnam now. Law and order equals racism. How we support the black struggle. How a lot of the same civil rights mentalities start to connect and kind of coalesce with the anti-war movement as well. You can see the anti-draft mentality on this pin over here. Not with my life, you don't. College campuses will be a major site of political unrest, demonstrations. Some schools will be have sit downs. Others will protest their schools. What they felt was working with the government for the draft of grade reporting. So the SDS is a big example of a youth collegiate movement against the war. This is a very powerful speech by Robert F. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's brother, who is currently running for president. So I'll let you watch that, and come back here. Welcome back. Powerful speech. You start to see some of these inspiring voices. We'd already seen so many earlier in the civil rights movement, from Fred Hampton to Malcolm X, even presidents like John F. Kennedy, all had been taken down by assassins' bullets. And in this case, we see Robert F. Kennedy trying to encourage people to remember Martin Luther King's memory in the way he lived. And then the video ending with Robert Kennedy himself being assassinated. So not only is the foreign policy of the nation troubling many, this still ongoing civil rights battle, but now with this kind of chaos at the top, it's clear that America's in turmoil, America's in chaos, and that's no better demonstrated than what happens in 1968 in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention. This is where Johnson has already decreed that he will not run for re-election. The Democratic Party here is the site of a massive protest, and if you watch this video, you'll see that there's even what's known then as a police riot that occurs. It's all televised, which is something that we need to keep in mind too, as far as media consumption. The TV is now in almost every home, and you're not even just seeing footage like this as the crowd notably yells, "The whole world is watching," but you're seeing footage from the Vietnam War itself. And this is really making people kind of stand up and take notice as to what's really occurring. And many people are unhappy with the government's direction, as we saw here. Continued unrest is felt on the college campuses. This is an iconic photo taken at Kent State University. This is where a major anti-war demonstration occurred, and the the university's ROTC building was actually burned down. In response to this, the National Guard was called in to bring order to the campus. Now, this was met with resistance by the student body and finally boiled over and culminated in the National Guard opening fire, actually killing 4 students on the college campus. Now, talk about unrest. You have a nation actually opening fire and killing its own college students in a college setting. This turned many people against not just the Vietnam War itself, but maybe the government's actions handling it foreignly and also handling it in a domestic sense. This is a Neil Young song about the Kent State shootings called Ohio. You can listen to that if you'd like. Now, this is not to say at all that every American is against the war, not at all. With Johnson refusing nomination for the Democratic Party, Richard Nixon returns for the Republican Party, and he starts to promote this idea of a silent majority, that the crowds at Woodstock, the protesters outside the DNC, those at Kent State, those are the vocal minority. But the large majority of Americans actually support the country and its actions. They are just not as bombastic in their voices. So if you give this video a little watch, you'll get a bit more understanding of Nixon and how he appeals to what he called the silent majority. Now, once you've seen that, we're going to end today with this document. It's a K. Ross Tools, An Angry Man Talks Up to Youth in 1970. This is a pretty interesting document, kind of having a feeling on the hippies, the yuppies, the counterculture generation during this war. Now, I would like you to, in the discussion board I posted in this folder, try to treat this as if it was a DBQ document. So give us like a 2 sentence response for it. Our first sentence being historical context, the second sentence being the audience purpose or point of view. This would be like you're trying to earn that hippie point in a DBQ rubric. So I've also attached the hip writing frames, so feel free to use those. I encourage you to use them. And as it's a discussion board, you should be seeing your classmates' posts as well. So feel free to look those over if you need a little help, a little guidance. As always, let me know if you have any questions, and I'll certainly get back to you.